school district. And we have a lot of assets in Ottawa County. We have zero assets in that area. So it's important also to kind of have a good foundation.
Good to know,
Yeah.
sir.
Thank you.
Which is really, frankly, shocking. Did you have any sales people there? Sales marketing? That'd be an interesting. That's all the people who get pressure.
Are we starting not imminently or what?
We're gonna s- we're gonna
I
s-
know we're supposed to start now.
We're going to start as soon as we can.
Um,
Jeffrey,
Is Scott coming?
congrats on your funding. I don't know how much, but I saw a post on social media. Cool. Hope College will keep you around.
For at least a little while, until the money runs dry.
Afternoon, everybody. I think we have enough to. I think Travis is going to be a couple minutes late, and Scott is typically late-ish. So, Keith, if you want to do roll call, then let's just roll.
Let's do it, and we don't even have to say I'm participating via teleconference from whatever. So we'll just go down the list.
We're all in Holland, Michigan.
So
Thank.
Feldman,
Present.
Thompson,
Here.
Hemingway, Peugeot,
Here?
Aaronshorst,
Here.
Christians.
Here.
And we know that Williams and Corbin are not here, but I will make a record when they attend in the minutes, if that's okay with the chair.
That's great.
You have a quorum, Mr. Chair. It's your meeting.
Thank you, Keith. Hi, everybody.
Good afternoon, Chair.
We are going to, I'm just going to say it now. We have a hard stop today at 4:50. The
4:50?
BPW board meeting starts at 5. So
Wherever we are.
wherever we are, we have to be done.
Okay, good to know.
So with that, we'll just jump right in. I need a motion to approve the meeting minutes from last meeting.
So moved.
Thanks, PJ.
Support.
Thanks, Nikki, supported by Aaronshorst. Any comments or questions about the meeting minutes? All in favor of approving the meeting minutes as written, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Great. Moving right along to public comment. Would any of the public like to comment? All righty. Going once, going twice. And then the receiving of the online public comments. Because there was no attachment, I am assuming there was none.
I
Unless
believe that's
something was
correct.
missed. Okay.
Right.
Well, that makes that part easy. They are received. Okay, so before we jump into the report, there's a couple of things that I would like to slide in. Because we had talked in theory about July being a community feedback month, but specifically, we don't have any dates in July. I thought we could take a couple minutes right now and get a little bit of an update on the various community engagement fronts from Dave and or Keith, depending on who is the appropriate person to give us those updates. And then maybe we can land on at least a next meeting date for July early, such that we don't get squeezed at the end at 4:50.
Good idea.
So with that, David or Keith?
Good afternoon. I'll go ahead and get started. I think Keith probably can chime in on this as well. If you recall, there were multiple different avenues to receive feedback. One of those had to do with an intentional outreach for listening tour to various large energy users in the city of Holland. And we have now had 4 of those sessions completed. Those have been with Yunfeng, Transmatic, Hope College, and Hayworth. And there have been a different strategic development team member in attendance to each of those meetings. We've taken notes on those and be working on trying to create some summary for your digestion and incorporation into your thought process for these strategies. We have several other inquiries that are out there. It has been challenging getting time set up. I think generally there's a feeling of interest among some of our large users, but either concerns about the fact that they don't feel like they have a lot to offer right now in terms of particular strategies that they're working on. They're fairly early in their journey, or also maybe just a concern about where they are in terms of how busy things are and trying to get staffs aligned and get people. But we continue to work on that. We do have a couple others that we're working on setting up. One of them's not till September though, so it's gonna be a little bit late maybe in the process, but still valuable input, I think, and that's with Bentler. And then we've got, we're working on trying to arrange something with the hospital as well at this time. And again, there are several other inquiries that are out there that we're waiting on, some sort of definitive feedback. We have received some no's. I'm not gonna call them out in the public, but unfortunately, yeah, we have had some that have said that they just do not have time right now to meet with us.
That was the reason for is just a timing thing, or?
I think so. I think so.
Okay.
Or in terms of being able to, make that a meaningful engagement. Yep.
Okay.
So that's where we are with that outreach. Again, I would say that generally those are going very well. They've been good conversations. I think probably eye-opening in a lot of respects, and good in terms of establishing a conduit for collaboration and communication between, city/BPW and these entities going forward. There's a lot of interest in continuing to have dialogue, so that's encouraging. And then other avenues for feedback, primarily the survey instrument with the Frost Institute was intended to be something that would be able to gauge reaction to specific strategies that this group was coming up with. So we're kind of, I want to say halfway, but we are in the process of starting to work on the review of the strategies that were put forward by the SDT leadership team. And I think as we're a little bit further through today, we'll be able to re-engage with Julie Ornay to see about putting together the actual instrument, how that would work, if you feel like we're far enough along on some of the strategies that we can actually utilize those now for gaining some specific feedback from. And again, this is for residential level and for general business level survey response. And then I think probably the last thing, and this is where I would ask maybe Keith to join in as well in terms of logistics, is, I shouldn't say last thing, next thing. Next thing is the town hall meeting sort of approach, where we talked about maybe getting a time in either here or one of the areas by the Civic Center perhaps, having something a little bit more fleshed out that the SDT team could this SDT group could actually be there and in attendance to meet with people that come in from the public and get into more of a dialogue on things. And that we do not have a date or logistics established for that as of this time. But that's something I think we're interested in trying to start to work on with this group, is identifying that date and the mechanism for having that feedback. And then the last piece is the that we were going to have one of your meetings, and I think we talked about perhaps July 19 as being that meeting, as being one that we might have more of an intentional outreach to groups, call it economic development groups, call it special interest within the community groups, whoever they might be, to actually come in and have 10 to 15 minutes of your time on the agenda, more than just a normal 3 to 5 minute public comment period, but a little bit more where they can react to what has been developed and give you feedback. So, that is a possibility of kind of establishing that date for that purpose, potentially. And again, I think that has to do a little bit with where you're at today and willingness to kind of utilize that as a timeframe for that feedback.
Yeah, that makes sense. Keith, anything to add, or is that representative of?
No, that's very representative, and it really highlights again that the one date that we've locked in with you, at least at this point, is the July 19, Monday, 3 to 5 time slot. And outside of that, we don't have anything on the calendar. So really, I think it comes down to, where are you all at with getting comfortable with at least a set of draft recommendations? I don't think either Dave and I would recommend, or any of you have had conversations of, you get to draft recommendations, you have some of these opportunities for input, you certainly have an opportunity to then tweak at that point before you would kind of finalize and then send on to council. So it's just kind of where you are in that process at this point.
Yeah, there's a bit of a cart and horse thing happening, the 19th with the, community groups giving feedback. We'd like them to give feedback off of the draft recommendations that we have, right? That would be the point of that. Just like Julie's, the Frost Center research. So a little bit of, I don't want to put too much pressure on the next hour and a half, but that would sort of determine where we can get in the next 90 minutes is basically we'll sort of drive whatever comes next based on the Frost Center and the 19th being, maybe we have to meet before that. Anyways, I'm not going to get in the way of the 90 minutes and eat it up, but that is a little bit of the issue. Yeah. Okay. All right. Good. And on the large customer stuff, do we want to have, you mentioned you're taking notes. Is there a way we're going to circulate those how do you?
Yeah, I think we want to, again, given the fact that these interviews are, reaching into what these companies are doing, I think we want to be careful and sensitive with, a lot of specifics, coming back verbatim out of those notes, but I think generalizations out of those responses in terms of what resonates with the business community for the strategies that you're looking at is kind of what we would like to try to, bring back for this group. So there's a little bit of, and I guess the question is 4 enough to start giving you that generalization at this point? Should we wait till we have a couple more? That's maybe up to this group, but we can certainly take the 4 that we have and create some maybe common themes to it and get that back to you. We just didn't want to give the raw things that might be a little bit too personal for those particular businesses, and we appreciate the candor which they've had with us.
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah, I think that's wise. And we have had people on all 4. Someone up here has been at each of the 4. So minimally, as we get into discussing this stuff, hopefully if you were in one of those meetings and something that we're talking about here like resonates one way or the other, you would bring that up in this discussion to either, support or push back on some of the stuff in here. So minimally we have that much that can influence our commentary here. So.
Dave, could I request, though, before those notes are rolled up from those listening sessions, can Ted or I don't know who's pulling together, Amy or Allison, send it over to the SDT member that attended that meeting, just to see if there's any themes or anything they picked up on?
Yeah, that's not a problem at all. As you were a participant, in one of those, and Jeff was in one, and Nikki was in one, and Tim was in one, so we can make sure that our notes, as you read those, that those are reflective of what you heard. So
Before they
absolutely.
go up, yeah.
Yep.
Cool. Great. Well, thanks. That's good to lay that groundwork and get an update on the community engagement. So jumping into the report, we went through 4 levers last time. We did not have PJ or Tim here. We did have their comments, which was great. And in reflection of how the last meeting went, I think the term I'll use here is I feel like we buried the lead a little bit, in terms of we never really named the end of where the whole plan would get us. We just jumped right into lever one and just started talking about that. And I feel like that in combination with Dave has a spreadsheet that has some numbers backing up all of the report. I thought I would try and unbury the lead here before we jumped into lever 5 and then reviewed all the rest of it. So as Travis and I, like we had discussed, tried to put the ingredients of a recipe into this report and not bake the whole cake. What we were doing is we had been talking with Dave and his staff around like where would these sorts of things, like where would it sort of get us more or less, right? And so at the end of this report that we had talked about last time, it does reflect essentially 13 metric tons of carbon per capita by 2030, which, for those of you who don't recall, is basically hitting that was previously the 2050 target, more or less, and obviously 1,000 assumptions baked into all of this stuff, but that was what we felt like was representative of at least a first step towards a good old-fashioned, more aggressive plan. And so as we go through the fifth lever and all the rest of them and people's comments and the feedback today, I think just have in mind that all of the small things are all part of what we believe is a 13 metric ton per capita goal by 2030 and not 2050, which is, I think, reflective of scenario B in the original community energy plan, which was the recommended or, you know, not most aggressive, but recommended strategy moving forward. And so all of that, I did want to have Dave actually take 5 minutes and just sort of walk us through the spreadsheet that he built. Not to explain every square inch of it, but to give us all that sort of like level setting. And with that in mind, we can jump into lever 5 and beyond.
Thanks. One of the safest things, if you talk to my wife, one of the safest statements you could make about me is that Dave has a spreadsheet. So, I mean, that what you said right there is absolutely true. So, anyway, if we take a look at the next, if you can go to the next one, Ted, instead of that spreadsheet, we'll come back to that one in a little bit. But this one here is the one that drives to the number that you've been referring to, Brian. So a little bit of history is in this spreadsheet as well. Again, I don't know if you can maybe go a little bit smaller because I have it here as well. So maybe those that are at the dais there can see a little bit more at one time. But what we try to do is capture 2010 numbers, which were the original work of the planning working team, which made the recommendation for scenario B back when the community plan was created. And then the 2018 numbers, which we have, or 2015 was an interim measurement, and then 2018, which was that most recent one. And now what we've got actually, and I'll show that in a little bit, we actually are very close to having 2020 numbers. I'm very glad to be able to see that. Our group has been working hard at trying to calculate that one, and good news is it's showing progress. Overall, if I could kind of steal the punchline on it, I mean, we'll be about 17 metric tons per capita rather than 19. Now, there's some reasons for that. One is 2020, right? I mean, so 2020 was a COVID year, and so there's some issues with that. It was also a weather normalized year. It was, I say weather normalized, weather mild year, both fewer cooling degree days and heating degree days, which if you're a meteorologist, you know that has to do with just how either hot extreme it was or cold extreme it was. It was less extremes in 2020 in our area, so therefore some of the air conditioning demands are affected by that. But good progress still. I mean, there's progress being made, and we should celebrate that. So the 2030 column, though, on this sheet, I think is the one really, what I did is I tried to take the work of the the leadership team of the strategic development team up here, Travis and Brian, who had put together for you a list of strategies to consider and targets. And those targets actually had various quantifiable measured adjustments to things, this much reduction in natural gas usage by these different sectors, this much transfer to electrification, this much reduction of electricity over the next decade, for example. So that's great to have that kind of target, because then as somebody who works with spreadsheets, you can take and plug that in and say, okay, well, I can tell you what that means then, based upon what you're giving as a target. And so, simply, taking a look at natural gas, for example, you can see if you look at the formula there, I'm not going to walk everybody through every formula, but just to give you an idea how this is generated, we said that there'd be 10% less. We figured that SEMCO would continue to run its EWR program, Energy Waste Reduction Program, at a level similar to what it had previously, which is a 1% per year kind of program. BPW is enhancing our program up to 2%, but SEMCO, the assumption here is that they would continue to run that at a 1% per year. There would also be a transfer of 5% of natural gas to electrification. So you see 5% natural gas coming off the table. So now you're going to multiply what happened previously then by 90%, or a 10% reduction. And you're also going to multiply that by a 95% factor, which is representing that transfer to electrification. So that really happened on each of those different segments, the residential, commercial, and industrial. And then on the electricity, now we're really dealing with more what's both the intensity of our electric portfolio and how much electricity are our customers using. So that's what these formulas are really driving to. It's really based upon the intensity and the usage. Well, our usage is down here under the electric consumption. And here what we looked at is the overall target is a 10% reduction in your sheet that you reviewed. It's a 10% reduction in electricity. And you say, well, Dave, you just told me that our EWR program is going to be enhanced. We're going to be up to 2%. Yes, but we're also going to be absorbing that 5% transfer that happened from the electrification of the natural gas. So that's going to offset some of the EWR savings. So instead of it being, moving to 2% by 2024, which is going to be cumulatively about a 15% reduction in EWR over this period of time, it's really going to be more of a 10% reduction. And that, again, is not really even accounting for load growth, which there is a small percentage of load growth in our integrated resource plan forecasted for each of our segments. So there, again, you see each of those segments really multiplied then by an intensity factor. And when we did our integrated resource plan, we looked at several different scenarios. One was a base case where we didn't constrain the output at all. We said, look, just choose your least cost way of meeting the needs of our customers in 2030 and 2031 and on and on and on. And so the model ran that case. Then we went back and said, now we want you to constrain that. We said, if the community energy plan is going to meet its goals over the years and ultimately by 2050, the electric portfolio has to do some of that work. Not all of it, because we know transportation should do some, building energy consumption for natural gas should do some in efficiency. And so a glide path was created in the integrated resource plan to allow the electricity then to be constrained in a way that it would follow along and help the community ultimately reach that goal. And the carbon constrained case, as it's called, has a limit of 850 pounds per megawatt hour established for 2030. And then there's a subsequent limit of 700 pounds per megawatt hour when you get out to 2040 in order to make sure that electricity continues to do its part. So this part of the 2030 then, if you go back up to where we were, the CO2 from electric consumption really, again, takes that electric consumption, takes the energy intensity, the carbon intensity of the electric portfolio, and it calculates then what is the resulting situation. Okay, then if you go down, then you can add the two together to get really the total CO2 from residential, commercial, and industrial between your electricity and your natural gas. And then further down the line then has to do with transportation. And here again, if you look at where we're at, We have a couple multipliers on this cell. Ted, if you can hover over cell, or get down to cell L25 there. Thank you. One more up, I think it is. You could see in that formula, you see the number from the previous result multiplied by a 0.75 factor and then multiplied by a 0.95 factor. Well, the 0.95 factor was some evaluation of reduced vehicles mile traveled, and the 0.75 was for factoring in an electrification and then an assumption that a good amount of that electrification would actually also be motivated to elect renewable energy as its source of power for the electrification of that. So those two factors then are carving a certain amount out of gasoline in order to give a new number for the vehicle, the gasoline transportation portion. Diesel, I think the next line has something similar again, and then other transportation actually is going up. Why? Well, because some of that is not going to be supported by renewable energy, but some of the electrification now is going to be supported by a portfolio of resources, so you can't assume all of it is. So we actually raised up, which was a pretty small amount, but under the other transportation, we're now accounting for the electrification portion of the vehicles under there, and that's actually going up 20%. It's a much smaller change up than the others are down, but it is sort of accounting for that. And other than that, the wastewater went down significantly because we have adopted at our wastewater, or will be adopting at our wastewater plant, anaerobic digestion, which will provide a renewable resource for powering both the site's electricity as well as some of the heating demands on the site. And so that's why that one is going down significantly there inside the community. Solid waste really didn't see much of a change. I think at the time that this was being put together, that wasn't really something that was a major emphasis on the SDT leadership's recommendations. So when you add all of that together and you do the quantifications of it, you can see why down under cell then M32, Ted, if you go there, you can see we're at about just under 13.5. And Brian is correct. The scenario B was the one that was selected by the planning working team. It had a result of about 13.4, and the recommendation then to City Council was to adopt a stretch goal, adopting scenario B, but then aiming for a goal that was more aggressive than that, and that's where the 10 metric ton per capita goal came up that was adopted for the CEP.
By 2050.
By 2050.
And what we're looking at here and what the recommendations as it sits now is a path to 13 by 2030.
Correct.
Okay. So I think unless people have initial comments on that.
Just that we end up talking about consumers' announcement to shut down the plants by 2025 right in our window, and what that'll ripple through if it's baked in.
Yeah, I
Well,
actually
under
emailed
this-
Dave about that over the weekend and was like,
Yep.
hey, does that move what we're trying to do here? And if so, how much?
Yeah.
And
Do you want me to move on to that, or do you want to go to offsets and come back to that? What would you like to do?
So I think what I'd like to do is just put a pin in it.
Okay.
And then we'll get to it, I think, certainly.
Okay.
I think just with everybody here and showing the data, and I don't want this to get into an exercise of like, let's look at that formula again, Dave. Our job is strategy here, right? And what Travis and I put in front of you, backed up by numbers, is a plan to get to 13 by 2030. And I think an overarching question that we have to be asking and answering is like, is that, do we like that or not? From a strategic perspective. And so I just that probably should have been the opening statement last time, but you got me, you're dealing with me. So there you go. So anyways, that being said, Nikki, did you have something?
Well, as long as we're having a goal like that, and we're being a little more aggressive because we can, and it has shown changes, why don't we be more aggressive and go to 10 metric tons by 2030? Is there
I-
something to stop us from doing that? It's all in decarbonization, and here we have this coal plant, perhaps, maybe changing some of the dynamics.
Yeah, I don't think that is totally on the table. We could end up in 75 minutes from now saying we should be at 0. I don't
Right.
really have a prescribed opinion. All I'm saying is we have
Okay.
the ingredients to get to 13 by 2030 on the table. And that's what's on what we decide is our recommendation, I think is, Travis and I did not make the official recommendation. We just put this in front of this group. And now we've got numbers to make us feel confident that it's at least somewhat feasible with all the assumptions.
Yeah, and
Dave.
I do appreciate that while you maybe wanted to lead with that last time, that it is the result of a series of targets that are squarely identified.
Yep.
Right.
So if something new is identified as an ultimate goal, I would hope, I think and staff would hope, that this group would identify the targets
Yeah.
that actually would drive to that as opposed to just plucking a number. But,
Right.
I mean,
Right.
yeah.
What we did to begin with and why we didn't want to do anything until we had numbers to back up the suggestion.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So,
There's the tension is we needed to start somewhere, and that's where we started, and that's what all the numbers are supporting. But this isn't, I'm fine with talking about being more aggressive, I guess is my answer. I don't know what the group decides, but I'm fine with that as a conversation. Or less aggressive. There's probably pros and cons to all of the variety of ways to go about this. But that's what we have in front of us to adjust or not adjust. So I'd like to, if assuming PJ and Tim got caught up from last week, and I feel like we're all sort of on the same page as best we can in these every 2-week deals, I'd like to pull up the 5th lever where we left off, which is the carbon offsets. And these numbers, if I'm not mistaken, don't factor any adoption of carbon offsets, okay? So that's a huge caveat, is there's no insert company name saying we're going to buy all renewable electricity and buy carbon offsets because we feel like our consumers and our customers are asking us to be net zero. There's 0 of that in getting to this 13 right now.
And Brian, even beyond that, we know there are offsets already being purchased in our baseline, and that's also not it.
And we're not even capturing that either, right? Which, Nikki, to your point, like, do we want to have a more aggressive goal? And my reaction being like, I would be fine with that as a conversation topic, is because we don't have any of that stuff in these numbers.
Right.
So let's look at the carbon offset lever and the goal, which is take a leadership role in the creation of a community-based clearinghouse to provide businesses and residents access to carbon offsets to meet their individual goals and commitments. That's the goal. What do we like or not like about that as a goal?
It could be a goal. Carbon offsets to me seems to be more of a strategy in itself. That's a way to bring down your carbon number, your decarbonization. So this is a fine goal. We need to do this, but isn't carbon offset itself kind of it's not a lever like the electric or the education. It's a means of doing something.
I don't really see it any differently than like promoting building efficiency through the energy waste reduction programs, or it's a lever to pull in order to get the number lower. I don't know.
And I think the goal is to create we're saying to actually create some kind of mechanism so that we can incentivize, or we can make it available so that our local businesses can do it more effectively and efficiently. So it's as much about creating something for them to utilize as it's not us actually making the choice to utilize it, which is more of the strategy. So a company in town would have to have the strategy to do that. But if we can create a vehicle to allow that to happen, then that's something we can control. And we can put out there to help incentivize or to make that something somebody's more willing to do. So the goal is to create that vehicle or that mechanism.
Yeah, and if we recall from our education session way back when with Ben Massey from Blue Source and Mike Trupis from Foresight, they I'll oversimplify, but a huge opportunity in that world is just pure education. Like, a lot of people don't even know that these things exist or how they work. And then the other opportunity is leveraging economies of scale on purchasing power, which I think is the real two-pronged opportunity here. Is like, can we create a program or be a part of creating a program such that more people and individuals and companies know about it? And then can we work together to buy these things at such a volume such that we can drive the price down to make people want to adopt them more? I think is the two, like, sort of underlying ways that we can do well here.
I like the leadership role in the creation of a community-based clearinghouse. That may be, we want to put it on every lever, because all these, anyways, I listened in on the conversation with the company. I think companies want to know, what are we doing and how do we organize this? Everybody's kind of doing their own thing, and they want to do this decarbonization or reduce their carbon footprint. But how do you do it? And I think with this carbon offset, the leadership role is important, and I think we could do that with all of them. I mean, somehow, this community has to work together. I mean, that's part of our role here, and that's part of what we're doing with the community, listening and this whole listening tour. And we may want to think about creating this clearinghouse idea for some of the other levers too. Anyhow.
Other thoughts on this goal? Specific enough, not specific enough, what? Yes, Jeff.
So I generally kind of hear what Nikki's saying. I think it makes sense to have offsets its own separate thing as a lever to me, because I think the approach to it is going to be a little bit separated from, say, our approach to buildings and the electric portfolio and transportation. It obviously is kind of part of those conversations, but it's a little bit of a separate entity. I mean, I could imagine, something like Rex kind of entering into some sort of thing like that in aggregate, and like the final actual, what makes it out into the world. But I don't know. I really liked this one. I didn't have any comments on it, on either the goal or the target. But I think it makes a lot of sense for, from the business's standpoint, to have a trusted source where the information's clear and we know how to do it, and we can leverage economies of scale and some of this stuff, and without doing a whole lot of legwork on the ground in an area that people at those businesses don't really understand. You can go to somewhere and this is a good spot, and it's already been vetted, and it explains it clearly. Like, I think this is a great idea.
To expound a little bit on the language, we had first written this as basically create a community-based clearinghouse, and we undid that and rewrote it to take a leadership role in the creation of, because we weren't totally positive that this clearinghouse, as it were, would or should actually reside inside of the city or the BPW. Right. That may be the best place, but we weren't convinced that was. I happen to know of a nonprofit in Grand Rapids who's very serious about creating something like this in Grand Rapids, and it would not be a big leap to add the lakeshore in, especially from a business perspective. There's tons of businesses with employees in both spots. So at the risk of not duplicating something literally 30 miles down the road, or potentially another kind of nonprofit or some other organization is ready to just spin the thing up, we just wrote it to make sure that we were a huge encourager and taking a leadership role, but not explicitly saying this is on Dave's lap or Keith's lap to fund.
Right.
So Do we like that, or is
It
that?
caught my eye too when I was looking at the word clearinghouse, and it's just from my time in the banking world that meant, you know, real transactional management concepts, right, ins and outs. And so just that word, I pulled it back a little bit in some of the suggested wording I sent over, and it's more along the lines of providing Holland businesses and residents with carbon offset purchasing capability that's readily accessible, simple, affordable, transparent, and of high integrity. So trying to zero more in on the kind of criteria, the kind of thing that we want available, but not getting into the transactional clearinghouse type nature of it. Just because it could read like we're going to create a clearinghouse and no idea if, you know, that's going to be in the solution or not.
Right, that might be too specific.
Yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense to me.
Because that access, simplicity, affordability, that's going to be the criteria that, and there's a lot of organizations, like you point out, there's international, regional, you know, national organizations that are providing these services online,
Yep.
you know, versus contractual. So just trying to expand that a little bit more.
Yeah. Dave?
Yeah, I think that's a great point, and I just wanted to maybe just add, Brian and Travis, for your benefit, you know, some of the discussions that you provided back, I think, in coming up with this goal early on, is really born out of some of the earlier conversations about what if somebody wants to create a project in Holland that actually produces carbon offsets. So it's not just on the procurement side, and the whole idea behind a clearinghouse is that if an entity wanted to invest in a project that actually started to create carbon, is there something where there's value by other entities saying, I want to invest in what happened in Holland in terms of that project? But again, that may not be, and again, maybe that's too specific of the means, but
Yeah.
if you're looking at the goal or the targets, just making sure that you don't close the door on that goal and targets to where there might be value in somebody that says, I want to do something here locally, and then there's a value chain from
Yeah.
that.
Especially corporations, you know, that are doing carbon offsets, they've got a variety, they're happy to spend a premium if they can feel and touch the project, which would mean it's more local. And then typically they would invest a portion of their dollars towards a very small percentage towards something like that, and then they take the lion's share of their carbon and then they buy the cheapest thing they can wherever it is in the world. And so I love that. I don't know if it's a strategy or more of a tactic, but I love the idea of something local happening here, that insert company that we're doing the one-on-ones with could actually be like, oh, we'll take 10% of our carbon and offset and fund a local thing and get our employees to volunteer. I mean, that is much more Holland-esque, I think, than most other things. And then they can take the rest of the portion and have the ability to like sort of buy it all in one spot. I think, you know, have a menu of different things, I think is sort of the, you know, easing the path to transaction versus having them go lots of places. I think that would be sort of the idea. And whether we call that a clearinghouse or we just describe the product sort of spectrum and availability and attributes of the product offering, I don't really, that's fine either way from my perspective.
Are we missing a strategy then that captures that thought of inviting projects to be developed in our region? I don't think it's there. And I hadn't thought about that angle because it's not there, and it could be something very helpful.
Yeah, I think that would be a cool strategy to look into.
Yeah.
It's
kind of in the third bullet.
It's in the third bullet
under the action steps, but maybe the strategy could be worded a little bit differently. If you look at that first one there, that's kind of the
buried down
thought
there.
process in that third bullet.
Gotcha.
Yeah, but the strategy, the way it's worded, doesn't necessarily capture that because it talks about purchasing collaborative.
Right. That's where I stopped. Was right
Yep. Yep.
And I'll just bring up to Travis and Brian, I know, and one of the things where you were talking to Dave and I about some of your ideas that you put into this for everyone else to react to, is that if you would have that local project, the importance that a local project then very much gives some life to another one of the potential levers, which is the education lever. Because if you have something local and you can touch and feel something local, then you can connect with it in such a way rather than just purchasing kind of this nebulous thing on an exchange or a market that, so not my words or strategy, but Travis is smiling because I know that was part of your thinking behind.
Some organization in
put
town may
this.
be working on all this right now, so just leave it at that.
Good.
Yeah, I think for people are motivated by a variety of things, right? And some people are motivated purely by climate change. Other people are motivated because their customers are asking them to do something. But lots of people that own and run businesses that I know are super excited about doing things that are contributing to their local community at the same time as doing good for their business, at the same time as doing good for the environment, right? And that's the local project thing is, it doesn't solve all the carbon offsets in town, right? You're gonna need to buy stuff outside of town, more than likely, at least in the short term. But it is, I think, a way to get a lot of people more excited about these things around here if you're not motivated by one of these other factors. Other comments, questions on the goals and targets? Anybody, like, I guess I'm looking for major issues, major pushback
On this one or all of them?
on this one. Jeff is good. I'm seeing head nodding. Okay.
It's a great lever.
I think it's important to have the accurate accounting of those purchases
Yeah.
and all these, some kind of accountability for something like this.
Yeah, that's going to be a huge, I mean, honestly, like understanding like who's already buying this stuff is a big deal. And then having a mechanism to track who's going to start buying it in the future, whether it's through our quote unquote clearinghouse or not, we gotta know who's doing this if we're going to really accurately track our number. I think we go back to the top and like have a moment on each lever where we go, do we like this or we don't? The top one is the portfolio, and Dave, you can talk about the consumer's energy
Yeah.
announcement and if that impacts things
Sure.
in this lever. But
Yeah, and it's also responsive, I think, to the request that we got from the group to evaluate. And I started doing the work, and then the announcement came. So, so I had to like reevaluate the work. But I'm going to start with kind of maybe what I was evaluating at first. And so, Ted, if you can maybe go to the first one, all the way to the left there. Yeah, let me pull it up on my screen too, so I don't have to look so far away at it.
I have some glasses.
Yeah, I need a telescope is what I need. So, yeah, this one here is one that I was working on to try to give you a sense of the 50% number, which was in the target for the improving the portfolio. So, and it's working on coming up here. There it comes. All right. So what we started with was really a conversation around 2010 versus 2005 as well. Why 2005? Why 2010? And for Tim and PJ, who weren't here, but maybe you saw the video, Travis and Brian were really, if you go to the actual lever goal, it talks about aligning with some federal statements and really kind of even beyond federal statements as it relates to making a pledge to certain goals on a climate basis itself. So some organizations that have adopted science-based targets, they're called, are looking at what does it take to keep the degree Celsius rise at 1.5 degrees or less, by a certain date, and that would require a 50% reduction from 2005 levels. And so, since that's the message coming out, that was the message that Travis and Brian put forward in the work of the proposal. Now, I'll tell you, first let's start with that. So Ted, if you can scroll over to column I. So it's up on the screen there for everybody. You can see that what I first want to look at is if you take that spreadsheet that we went over a little bit ago, if you go to column I, I'm sorry, if you. Oh, okay, try to freeze the frames. Okay, that's a good idea. You can see that the 850 number, we've talked about that being the intensity. And then the actual sales number is the 606,000 megawatt hours would be city sales. What that would yield is it would yield a number for the carbon intensity from the electricity of just under 6.8 metric tons per capita, and would represent about a 57% reduction from 2005 levels. Okay, so it's a little bit more aggressive. Maybe that number represents a little bit more aggressive number. Now, what isn't in there is a significant change in demand. And we've talked about that on the horizon. You know, we do see industry continuing to locate in Holland, grow in Holland. We've seen some conversation, or had some conversations about fairly significant growth. So if the 606,000 megawatt numbers was significantly wrong, you know, then you're going to pull that number back towards the 50% number. But in absolute terms, what was given to you to get to the 13.5 metric tons per capita was actually a little bit higher than the 50% reduction from 2005 levels. It still had everything else in there that you talked about, you know, adopting the EWR program and going to, you know, electrifying a certain amount. All that was in there in terms of that basis, but it actually is about a 57% reduction from 2005.
Hey, Dave.
Yeah.
Dave, just a point of clarification. I'm reading line 16 from.
Oh, that's from 10. I'm sorry, that's from 10.
Okay.
Thank you. It's actually deeper from. It's a little bit deeper from 2005.
Cool. Just
Yeah, I didn't freeze my panes, and I should have done that. So my apologies for that.
way to go, Vanna.
Yeah. Yep. Exactly. So, and if you want to take a look at what does that mean, you can sort of see a relative sense here of about 7%, because the other ones that are there, you know, all have. If you look at line 16, then you look at line 19, right? It's about a 7% roughly, maybe a little bit higher than that in some cases, percent difference. So we probably are like a little bit north of 60%, you know, in terms of that from 2005. So if you were to say, well, okay, now we want to go a little bit more aggressive and make the statement higher than 50%, it does foot to what you had in the actual proposed amount in terms of that 13.5 metric tons per capita.
So 2 weeks ago when Jeff said, why not 53 or 54%?
Yeah.
You basically already had it done.
Well, yeah, it's like everything that's been happening.
Jeff,
we
where's
know
the
that
smile?
we know that a PACE financing district has already been created. That's good news that we've done that already. We know that additional coal is being shut down, so we've already done right. So you just being here has started to things have already started happening.
Yeah, we're actually gonna
So,
we're gonna keep meeting every 2 weeks for the
Right.
next 9 years.
And it's just going to happen.
It'll just be done.
Right, exactly. So that's what we did here. Now the question I know that's going to come up is, well, what does this mean for the Campbell plant being offline? And so maybe Ted, if you could do the same thing with the fourth one, the fourth file. And I'll try to get mine up at the same time here. Yeah, that's actually, is that the fourth one? That's the, let's look at the, that's the one. I'm sorry, third one, thank you. Yeah, there you go. So, did a little evaluation of the loss of the Campbell unit. And of course, we're already also going to be losing the Bell River unit by 2030. That's already in the plans. DTE, Detroit Edison, had already made that statement. Mm-hmm. So basically what you're down to at that point in terms of resources that burn fuel primarily is Holland Energy Park, a small natural gas combined cycle unit over in Fremont, Ohio, which we have about 2.5% of our power comes from. So very small, minor part, but it's very similar emission characteristics as Holland Energy Park is. And then peaking units, you know, like are at 48th Street. We call those peaking units, but they're simple cycle combustion turbines, which run very little, less than 5% of the time, frankly. Other than that, it would all be renewable energy in our portfolio. We'd just be down to those at that point. Now that Campbell is going to be shutting down by 2025, or at least that's what's proposed. So, we started looking at, well, what makes up the loss of Campbell and Bell River, and part of it's going to be a little bit of a freer dispatch of Holland Energy Park, but it also is going to be a little bit of increased renewables. And so what has been estimated in some of these integrated resource plans, have been levels that have approached 30+% of renewables at that time. So what we did is said, look, we had the old numbers based upon the constraint at 850. If we look at a 30% renewable target and then the characteristics of Holland Energy Park, what is that going to drive to? And you can see that sort of represented in columns F and G here, where you have the number of 610 under row 4. So that 610 pounds per megawatt hour would be the likely energy or carbon intensity of our portfolio. Now recall, if you scroll back to the left there under column B, and even column C was even more intense in 2010 than it was in 2005, but they're roughly the same. We were starting at around 2,200, just under 2,200. So this is a 70+% reduction to get to that in really a 20-year period of time. So that's very encouraging, but it also is a level of renewables that starts to get to a point where storage technology is really going to be needed, or we would have a lot of excess renewables at times where our demand isn't there in our system. It starts to kind of, and I went over this with our city council a couple weeks ago, and we presented the solar deals that we just put in place, but that it really starts to create a situation where it becomes more solar or more wind at times when our load isn't there, and it really just pushes it back to the grid so that in average we get what we want, but it sets up these situations where we're pushing it back and we don't know what the market is going to compensate us for that power. It's going to be a variable and potentially very low compensation, especially if the investor-owned utilities are also making deep investments in solar. There could be a lot of supply during the middle of the day and not enough demand. It could really start to drive down those prices. So to say that we're going to create a goal much beyond 30% renewables by 2030, I think would be a situation that I would feel uncomfortable as a general manager anyway of the BPW recommending the board pursue without the storage technology in place, with a little bit better understanding of what the market price situation is going to be for any excess supply that we'd have. But it does continue to ratchet down the 850 number down to 610. And what would that do then? And that's the slide Ted did have up. So if you can go back to that one now, Ted.
You're doing a great job, though, Ted.
Yeah, thank you, Ted. So now you can see with this new number in here, I'm sorry, yeah, that's the one. But if nope, not that one. It'd be number 4, file number 4. That's the one, yeah. Is that what's already up?
Yeah.
Okay, my apologies. I'm just looking for your headings to kind of get square where I'm at here. Oh, you're too far to the right. Go back to the left a little bit to 2020 or 2030, I'm sorry. Yeah, so now if you look at the 2030 goals and you go down to the bottom, the summation of that, remember we were at 13 and a half. Now we're at 11 and a half. Can you go up a little bit, Ted? Right there, that number under, row 32.
So
if we adopt 610 as the intensity, and again, if the demand reductions that we anticipate from energy waste reduction hold, the electrification that we want to absorb into electric holds, the vehicle electrification, all that, then the intensity number alone is really going to dramatically change. The only thing on this slide, this spreadsheet that changes is the electricity contribution. It's going to drop another 2 metric tons per capita out of the electric contribution.
Okay, I'm going to try and do a kindergarten recap. So Campbell is gonna be done, and Bell River, which is the other coal, is gonna be done by 2030,
Correct.
such that we will basically be powered by renewable energy and natural gas, more or less.
Yes.
And if we end up at 30% renewable energy, we end up at 610 versus 850 on an intensity metric.
Yes.
And one operational caveat there is that we've really got to take storage into factor storage in and figure something like that out, because renewable energy doesn't make energy at the same amount all day long when we want it necessarily. And all of that ends up moving our previous report and recommendations, if everything else stayed the same, from 13 to 11 by 2030.
11.5, yes.
Okay, so now we would be overachieving the previous scenario B by 15%, 2 out of 13, and 20 years earlier, without capturing any carbon offsets.
Correct. The amount, yeah, and I did a little bit of work on here to show what the amount of carbon offsets purchased would have to be to get to 10, but that is an amount that has not been built into these assumptions.
Yeah.
We do know that some people are buying offsets or may choose to invest in offsets. But that is not in that number right now.
So I don't want to throw a big wrench into everything you just talked about, Dave, but I think you got to work on like pitching this a little harder. This is like pretty cool.
Yeah.
Like you just straight lined
This is great.
a pretty awesome message relative to what we're doing here, right?
Yeah.
Is that just,
I
am
don't
I the
want-
only
I
guy
don't want-
understanding what's going on here?
I don't want to steal your thunder, so.
What is
Get
the
fired up.
He's an engineer, not a marketing.
I know, it would sort of be if you're too excited, people would be like, let's check his numbers. But
Yeah.
because you're just like, I don't know, it's a math equation, and so here it is.
So
then
what is
people
that
believe it.
percentage versus 2005 again? Are we up over 70%? I can't see it on the screen.
If you look at the situation, if we got to 610, the intensity versus 2005 would be down about 71% versus 2005. The total carbon reduced would be, I think, closer to 75% from electricity now we're talking about, right? So this is from electricity. For city-only sales, that would be around 75% down. But that's from 2005. And again, that has nothing in there for any new load growth from industry that's unexpected.
It should then, part of our job, given these things that are happening without our, consumers didn't get our report and go, we're going to close Campbell. I mean, we're not really like impacting any of this stuff at this point, so to speak. Should we be talking about strategically, and I don't even know if we can do this or if this is a BPW board function, like some sort of process or criteria around, as new load growth comes on, we have a particular new methodology for finding the generation
Well,
that
that's-
has to be a certain amount.
That's called our integrated resource plan.
Okay.
So, when we
Am I
did that,
hired? Do you want me to write it for you next time?
so I mean, when we do that again, and that's why if you look at this sheet here, it talks about cases, right? I mean, there are multiple different cases that were run, not to give a prescription, but to give a range of possible solutions that then, policymakers can wrestle with to be able to decide how to move forward on that. And so, that type of thing is updated every 5 to 7 years. We run a new integrated resource plan. So, we just did that at the front end here of the pandemic. So mid decade here, we're going to have a situation where we know Campbell's shutting down. We'll have a more definitive date on Bell River. We'll have a little bit better idea what the technology is on storage. And in the meantime, what we're doing is just what we did the other night with council, where we brought in 2 solar agreements to add another 17.7 megawatts of solar to our portfolio. So we're layering these things in over time. So it's not like we're sitting still.
No, I
You know,
won't. I hope I wasn't
but
suggesting that.
and I know you're not saying that, but I don't want anybody at home hearing that either. So, and maybe I just need to say again, we have a ton of wind and we have a lot of solar, just so when people come in and comment, just so they know that we already have a ton of solar and a ton of wind. So, but anyway, it is important that from a technology perspective, as we push that beyond that, that we have a strong understanding of the reliability implications as well as the financial implications of going beyond that. One of the things we don't know at this point is while we celebrate taking this much coal-fired generation out of the lower peninsula as it relates to carbon production, everything that Consumers has announced has been to acquire existing generation in Michigan, not building anything new from a fossil fuel perspective except for the solar that they want to add. So by 2025, the solar arrays that we talked about with council are just going to come online in 2023 and 2024. So there's not a whole lot new that can be built and come online by 2025, but you know that Campbell's coming off by 2025 in this announcement. So things are going to get a little tighter out there from a reliability standpoint, and I think that's another thing to really keep a close eye on as we look at, you know, our goals in this group and how we revisit it again when this SDT team meets again. Again, this isn't, you know, we're making goals for longer range, but we're meeting and we're running IRPs, you know, every 5 years, you know, so there's time to set a clearer path beyond 2030 next time you meet.
Right.
So,
Right. So for us, oh, Keith, sorry, go ahead.
I didn't want to cut in, but just one additional thing I liked. I saw when you said, I want to break this down a little bit, I can see heads in a way maybe that you weren't, and there were a lot of them that were going like this as far as kind of you summarized everything. So just one additional point, you know, there's headwinds of the 11.57 doesn't include any new generation that comes on. And I think that's where Jeff's conversation at last meeting is really one to unpack a little bit more, where it's not just the total number, but it's also potentially the intensity of the sector. Because as much as the headwind of, okay, we have new business that comes in and generates electricity, you know, that's where what we haven't counted on is the carbon offsets not being part of that number either. Mm-hmm. Now, you could possibly just say, well, we're just going to say those two are going to cancel each other out, but that's totally just kind of picking a number out of the air, and I don't know if that's, I don't think anyone has necessarily any basis upon which to say, well, is that a realistic assumption or not? We don't know.
I think that's true. It's also, I think, a little oversimplification of, like, there's not just two I mean, there's a lot of things that have to happen in all of these recommendations,
which is why
both ways.
Which is why I like your final paragraph, I think, that you guys wrote that says,
what do we
you know, look, leadership,
a lot of assumptions.
leadership, ownership. There's a lot of things that are necessary for these goals to be achieved. And there's a certain set of assumptions that go within these as well. I think as long as there's that clarity around it, you know, I don't think there's anything wrong with putting these kind of numbers out there, as long as, again, the plan is intended to be, at least it was in 2010, attractive to business. And so if we're encouraging business development, then business development brings new demands as well. So when you adopt a carbon reduction number, know that, you know, that is enhanced by business leaving, which we don't want. You know, you actually make that better if business leaves. Well, you don't want business to leave, so you want to make sure that at least you have an assumption in there that talks about this is under a situation where we have the growth that is anticipated, and if it's stronger than that, then obviously that could affect our ability to reach that number.
Scott.
Yeah, so when you talk about, we talk about energy reduction, that's one thing, right? But you bring up my little spider ears when you start talking about reliability storage. I really think, is the IRP addressing deeply in the future where we're at, where we're gonna be with that? Because a lot of industry in this area is really gonna be looking at that, whether they stay, come or go. Also the cost associated with that. So is there any planning assumptions in the IRP that moves in that direction?
Well, I think there's assumptions in there about the state and the regional entities planning. I mean, I don't think there's anything that anybody should be concerned about in Holland's system. But Holland's system is connected to a bigger regional system that is affected by how well regional grid operators plan for the future. And so the IRP does not attempt to try to characterize or make any sort of statements about level of investment that's needed outside of Holland. But I just say that I think our policymakers, and frankly, the next time the IRP is even done, we ought to have a very strong review of where are we in terms of grid stability and reliability and investments, because there's a lot of what we call balancing type of resources where you can actually dispatch them that are being pulled out of our area. And so, which is, it's great environmentally, absolutely. This is a good direction to go. But there are technology developments that need to happen to make sure that the grid continues to stay reliable as well.
Well, I mean, a part of those goals are reliable and affordable too, right? And so we have to balance all this across the spectrum, so.
Yep.
Thank you.
Yep.
Yeah. Go ahead, Nikki.
Yeah, so I have a number of things, but each one doesn't have to be answered at this point. The first goal, or the first target, so we have discussed what 50% reduction from 2005 levels, blah, blah, blah. We know what that means. But if this is our product and we give this to the public, well, they know what it means. What does this mean? I mean, I think it should be, we need to say it in English with a reduce whatever from whatever to achieve whatever. This is, the public needs a target. A clear goal with a beginning and an end. So that's one thing. The other, and I appreciate the BPW's their storage problems and the marketing part of it, pricing part of it, and that will always be a problem. And so that'll be something that will have to, as we said, be involved with the entire plan and over the grid over the United States. I mean, we're not isolated, and I appreciate the problem that you have with this. It can't stop us, and I think businesses will be attracted to Holland, and that's part of our problem. They're attracted to us because we have this desire to reduce our carbon, and yet it creates a problem for us anyhow because they're creating more carbon. So that's part of your, and I think that's something, Dave, that you and BPW do very well all along. You have been able to meet those problems and get yourself past that. And I'm wondering along with that, because many times it has happened when there have been mandates. Do you anticipate any federal or state mandates that will push you ahead? Or, I mean, not push you ahead, but make your plans, your 3 and 5 year plans, 10-year plans, accelerate them?
So I think the first couple comments probably are more for the SDT, right? I mean, as far as how
I
the
just think
clarity
it
of the
needs to
goal
be
is. I mean, that wasn't
correct.
so much a question for me. I think that's something that this group has to determine whether or not 50% is clear enough, whether there's better English to use there or whatever you want to do. As far as like federal programs, I know that there are bills that get introduced that try to accelerate the progress towards renewable energy. We do not have those right now as mandates to us. Those would be either things that come down from state or federal legislation. And it's hard for me to know whether that's going to be something that's going to happen. I will say that I think our progress that is being shown here is responsible. especially in the face of where we are in terms of the technology evolution on storage at this point and reliability. You know, I mean, I would love to say that, you know, we can't be stopped because of reliability, but guess what? You know, reliability issues will stop you if they happen. So, but, you know, I think what we have in terms of what's been represented there is something that is responsible for where we are in the technology and in the evolution where we are right now.
Would there be a way to incorporate into the Frost research questionnaire some sort of option around, like, we don't get this question as an option for people? Like, you know, like the city is thinking about adopting a 50% reduction versus over 2005 goals by 2030, you know, and there's like some sort of options to respond. And then one of them is, I don't get it. Like, trying to get at what Nikki's saying, because I don't know, I'm trying to think of a more simplistic, like, way to describe it that would be more approachable. Like, if we give like the metric ton number per capita, I feel like that's like way more confusing, but maybe not. Maybe everybody gets that and not the 50% reduction. I don't know if that's possible, but that would be.
Yeah, as soon as you tell us as a staff that we feel good about the goals and strategies in terms of how they're worded, that's certainly something we can ask Julie, you know, to maybe have some way of testing for the community its understanding of what the SDT is putting forward. I think that's certainly something that can be incorporated into the feedback mechanism for sure.
My hypothesis is the typical community member has not a high level of knowledge of any of this stuff, just because it's very nuanced and technical in nature. So getting some sort of like, answered B, but feel 20% confident because I don't even really know the subject matter or whatever would be, I think, good feedback. Especially that would honestly be interesting feedback because it would drive stuff on education as well, which is one of the levers, right? Like, how much do people even know about these things on any level?
Yep.
So.
Could we go back to the spreadsheet you just took off, Ted? Or is it Dave took it off? I wanted to make sure I had, there you go. So looking at the chart and looking at the target on the key lever electric portfolio, we're saying right now achieve 50% reduction. My notes that I'd made to myself was more question mark. So am I interpreting this chart correctly, looking at the lines 19 and 20, that the way you put it under the carbon constrained 2030 IRP case, that we would be achieving a 72% reduction, is that correct?
Yeah, that's what, again, with all the assumptions about load growth and all that, yes.
Fully understand.
Yeah.
So I just raised to the chair as far as, are we being aggressive enough based upon the assumptions that are within those spreadsheets of saying, and to Nikki's question of, put it in plain English, that we take a look at the greater than 70% reduction and use the base and what the intended goal would be if we were to get greater than 70. That per the chart. In other words, and all of us know there are tons of assumptions and things that have to occur, but it's providing a roadmap that I think is more realistic based on the data that has been presented to us so far and that you and the team have gathered. Does that make sense, or is that?
No, Tim, that's exactly right. Like when we put the ingredients on the table a month ago, we put 50 because that's, and since then they've run the numbers in more detail and the consumer's information. Like, I think that it would be silly to put 50% in the goal at this point,
Right.
considering we have a spreadsheet that says
But,
70.
As you
So-
pointed out, consumers heard what we were doing, so therefore, you know, we could be able to increase the percentage. But-
Brian's scary.
But to Nikki's point, because we've all had to educate or re-educate ourselves, and so I go under the assumption that the general public is not at the same level of awareness or understanding, especially when we get the BPW crew speaking in three-letter acronyms. No, just kidding. That within that target, to be able to state a percentage greater than, as opposed to, gee, boom, 50 or 60 or, you know, pick whatever number you want. But then also, a way in which we can wordsmith it to say, all right, we started at this carbon tons, and our goal by 2030 under that scenario would be this 11.57 based on the data we have at hand. I'm asking, are we at risk in doing so, or are we being too presumptive in all of those different assumptions coming true?
Well, and so I was going to ask this, Dave, and I don't know if I'm putting you on the spot here or not, but go back 10 years and you got handed the community energy plan, and with all of the unknowns and all of the committee work and all of the stuff having never been done, did you like at this point in the process 10 years ago, did you have more or less confidence relative to what you know now, having 10 years of history like doing this?
Yeah, I mean, you know, time is always a beneficial, you know, you benefit from time all the time. I mean, you know what technology has done, you know where pricing is, there's certainty. You know, further you go out and throw a dartboard on a forecast, it's always going to be worse, you know, and so as you get closer to that time frame, there's always clarity that gets added to it. Yeah. All I'm saying is, you know, again, 10 years ago, right, is when we were handed this, and here we are today. That much more clarity is here. We're being asked to say something for 10 years out from now, and we'll have a lot more clarity as we get closer to that time frame, especially if you start talking about 2040 or 2050. Yeah. There's even more, you know, more, you know, left to speculation about what's going to happen in, you know, 2040 or 50. So I'm feeling a lot more comfortable now, but that doesn't mean that everything will just continue.
Sure.
You know, to go in that direction.
Sure. Yeah, that makes sense to me. Is like, I think we have a lot of tailwinds on writing a much more aggressive, something more aggressive right now, because we've had 10 years of experience. We are not making a 2050 plan. Like, we made a 2050 plan to get to 10, and now we're talking about something much more tangible around 2030, getting to whatever, 10. I don't know. I just feel like, Tim, to your point, like, should we be writing it a little more aggressively? I feel like we should at least write it such that the spreadsheet is represented. I mean, at the very, you know, so whether that's 65 or 70%, I don't know. But Jeff, what do you think?
So I guess two comments. One, so I'm looking at the slides on the IRP. I was playing around a little bit. So the case that Dave laid out, getting down to 610, the carbon constrained case, it looks like, I'm kind of eyeballing it, that's with before just the Bell River closing, would have got the carbon intensity down right around 700. So this would be so 610 is obviously, with both of them, we're getting down lower than that.
The constraint, right? Yeah, lower than that, but there was an aggressive carbon constraint case which had a $700 limitation at 2030,
right?
And then there was the carbon constraint case which had an 850. I think you're seeing a little bit, you know, those typically, because of the investment that's made to get you there and to sustain it over a period of time. You know, you don't buy a new power plant every year. So what it does is it gets you a little bit under and then probably maintains it for for the remainder of that decade. So again, I would be very careful again about trying to say, let's pick a year which had the low point in the dip. And I know you're not saying that. Yeah.
I'm not trying to say that. So I'm just saying the 610, that is kind of in line with the aggressive carbon constrained case here or there. So the aggressive carbon constrained case, we're talking about, again, according to this, something like 50%-ish renewable. So again, kind of pointing to not just 2030, but also to 2050. Any pathway to, like if you're looking at, say, a carbon neutral electric portfolio by 2050, all of the pathways to that start by getting to high renewables and natural gas by 2030. So I mean that has to be our 2030 target, has to be high renewable penetration and natural gas. And whether, I don't know if that's 30% or 50%, I'll defer to like what exactly the percentage, but I think it's a pathway. It's on the right path to something like getting to 2050 and actually having a carbon neutral electric portfolio, which I think is great. And Dave's comments on storage and the price of renewables and stuff, I think are appropriate. It's also worth noting that solar has dropped in price every year since the 70s. Battery prices have come down 90% in the last 10 years. So there is a lot of momentum in these, and knowing some of the technical aspects of these, there aren't huge technical hurdles on either of those fronts that are, we're staring up and against the boundaries of where prices are going to, and I could be wrong about that. So I don't know. I think certainly going something over the 50% under 2005 levels, I think we have to go lower than that.
What do you like? Give me a number.
I mean, I had written down in my notes something like 70%, and looking at Dave's analysis, that seems like kind of where it's falling. I think that puts us on a pathway. It's aggressive. It's really aggressive. It gets us to high penetration renewables and natural gas as our only sources.
Which sounds like is sort of what's happening anyways with Campbell and Bell River, right? That was my kindergarten recap.
Yes.
So
I would push for, I think it's on the pathway to a renewable portfolio. It's a pathway that I think would fit with some of the analysis that's been done in the IRP without like going crazy in either direction or putting all of the reductions just on the electric portfolio, but it sets us up to, be able to continue moving in the, the 2030 to 2040 time range or 2040 to 2050.
Anybody like a different number than 70?
I've been trying to play devil's advocate in my own mind with a couple of levers that aren't baked in the cake yet. We know they can be sizable with carbon offsets, education. So two big levers there, and I'm struggling because on one hand, it's always good that management has extra levers when certain assumptions maybe don't come to fruition. You've got other levers to offset. On the other hand, not allowing those to be levers that just fill a gap from let's say, not coming to fruition in a certain target area, but that is its own lever to be developed to knock off another metric ton, that kind of analysis of what kind of adoption rate and by whom might we need to get to 10 by 2030 with knowing those levers exist. So I'm struggling on whether to use those for management's capability to, offset other misses, or to put firm numbers, try to put some kind of numbers and assumptions around those levers. It's not in here yet. Those lines aren't in here. And should this be the group that takes a stab at forming the basis for some assumptions for adoption rates, education effectiveness, starting to take a step towards measurable success? Even if they're slightly conservative, a lot of unknowns right now. We got 10 years to figure it out.
Yeah.
Is it that harmful to create a line and start thinking about assumptions that would add a little bit more into the
Can I play it back one half step, Boyd, and just ask, as it relates to the portfolio, the electric portfolio and the discussion around the grid and everything, your reaction to the 70 versus the 50% reduction?
Yeah, the 11.5 feels right, but I feel like I don't want to stop there. Because I
Yeah.
feel like there are other levers that can push us a little bit further over a 10-year period.
No, I'm good with that part of the conversation. I just want to, technically we're still on lever 1 of the going back to the top, which is a big lever with the portfolio. So I just want to, like, if we want to change the goal or whatever, is that the goal or the target? I can't even,
That's the target.
target.
Thanks for
is-
reining me in. I see what you're saying. I did leap a little bit ahead there.
No, it's great.
Yeah.
I'm all about it. I mean, it's all interconnected,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
You're not going to get to the 11 without all of it. So,
Yeah.
but as it relates to this one, the target 50% reduction from 2005 levels, what Jeff is suggesting is change that to achieve 70% reduction from 2005 levels, which from a marketing standpoint and leadership standpoint, by the way, would definitely get you a headline.
Yeah.
That's 20% more aggressive than the federal. But we got a spreadsheet, and Dave gave it to us, so I
Yeah.
feel good about it.
Yeah. Tim's suggestion around greater than 70, I like that extra word in front of it.
Tim's backing up.
I would
Equal to
quantify.
or greater.
I'm fine with greater than 70%, because I've been working with Dave for a number of years, and his numbers usually are quite solid. But the other thing, to Nikki's point, I just throw out of, okay, what's that mean from a quantified standpoint so that people can understand? And to me, that would be, we started at this metric ton, we're going to this metric ton at the minimum. So that way people go, oh, gee, we do whatever.
So just calling out from this detailed spreadsheet relative to the portfolio, the metric ton number.
Are you trying to get at with that, just like, what reduction does that make in the total? Like for this would be a 70% reduction in the electric portfolio,
Right,
which is
and
a 30% reduction, like, full stop? Is that what, or 40%?
Relative to the electric portfolio, it's where is the point of beginning and where are we headed in 2030? So if we're expressing it at greater than 70%, that begs the question from the public of 70% of what? Where did we start? Where are we planning?
Are you
to
saying,
head?
I guess,
So electric portfolio is what I'm addressing.
okay, but is that to like put in perspective of, because I don't think people have any idea, like, transportation versus electricity versus building, heating and cooling, like, how big are those chunks of pie?
Yeah, each one.
So
of the
are we
chunks.
trying to help them understand, like, it's 70% of the electricity goes down by 70%, which reduces the size of the whole pie by
X.
X? Is that what we're really trying to get at?
I think we get, go ahead, Trev.
I think what I would suggest is that you get your number that you want as your goal. So if it's 70%, I don't believe it's healthy for us to try to solve this conversation at this point. And I think the way that you could address it is when Dave has whoever in their marketing group pretty this up, you could make a graph that shows here's what it was then and here's what it is now. And that visual representation goes along with the words. And for those who are visual learners, they can look at that. And those who are word people, they can look at that. If you're a spreadsheet person, you can look at that. But I think we should not try to wordsmith this thing to the point that we have explained every key thing at this moment with this group, because there's other people that could help lay that out. I think our key is to get, we wanted to say 70% or greater than 70% or whatever, and then we can, with some notes, we can come back and make sure that gets added to it.
Support.
That sounds good.
Yes, good.
I like 70%. I'm not trying to be Debbie Downer on greater than, but like 70% is we got a bunch of assumptions, and there's load growth. There's a lot going on here, and 70% is nothing to be sad about. And every couple of years, this is all going to get revisited, and we're outpacing all of everybody who's making any announcements on this stuff by a bunch with 70%. So I just think 70, it's one of the 5 levers. I feel good
they
about
do
70% myself.
On math papers, they say equal to or greater than 70%.
Equal to or greater than.
Just in case.
I guess that'd be a good split in the difference
At
there, Nikki. I
least.
like that.
At
Maybe-
least.
At least, ooh.
I
Raise your one. Raise your one.
I mean, I think if you had polled everyone an hour and a half ago and said, hey, what if we threw 70% reduction against the 2005 goals, everyone would have been like, holy crap, how are we going to get there, right? So, I mean,
No,
I
we see it.
feel like that's
It's
pretty good.
possible.
Whatever. It's summoning my inner spreadsheet man here. Okay, so we can talk more about at least or equal to, but 70 is the number.
Captain Keith has his hand up.
I'm
And I-
ignoring Keith on purpose.
And I would agree, Travis, one of the things, because we have a hard stop and we're coming up against it.
I'm aware.
Is you might want to talk about how do you do the wordsmithing that Travis was just talking about, where the next meeting that we have is July 19, where at least we talked about July 19 is when you'd invite other groups in, but yet you don't have something really prepared that you would say, hey, we're good with a proposed document. So now the other thing, and I'll just make it complicated, because here's the reality, especially when you're communicating to the public, it's complicated. So you guys just kind of gave a consensus to 70%, but I'll ask it so David doesn't have to. Is it 70% of the carbon intensity of the overall portfolio? Or is it 70% in overall numbers? Because we've all had the discussion with you of, 3 large industries come in between now and 2030 is one of those assumptions. And almost assuredly, you're not going to meet the 70% number that you just agreed to was a good number on an overall capacity of what is generating, right? Now, that could be offset in it with a different lever, but if you're just talking about that, so that's where it gets
Those are the
complex.
strategies that we don't deal with. I mean, at this level.
But that's
I know,
all
but
of that I'm
it's
pointing out
possible.
is that it gets complex.
Yes, it is. It is.
Because if you say 70% and we don't, then all of a sudden, are we not going to have this business come in? Because if we accept this business coming in, we're not going to hit this goal that we've established.
That's not the same as what this is. This is how it's made. And I might be over my skis here, but I believe that this is the generation sources, which Campbell's coming offline, Bell River's coming offline. It's a mix of natural gas and renewables and battery, but what we're doing is setting a target. I mean, you could, in theory, add a ton of absolute carbon by way of businesses coming here, but the generation, which is this lever, could all be the same relative mix of where it's coming from.
My interpretation of the wording here, when it says total carbon emissions from electric generation, the electric generation is going to be responsive to whatever the demands are. You're not going to have electric generation if there are no demand. So the new demand coming from businesses does affect the total carbon emissions from electric generation. I'm not sure if that's what you were saying, wasn't the case, but I think the way it's worded right now is this would be something that we would be further constrained if we added 20% more demand, because it would become that much harder to keep the total carbon down. Your intensity would have to change that much more down in order to ensure that your same total carbon number is met.
That is all true, and the spreadsheet that we looked at that you built is also true. That says 70 on there.
Because the spreadsheet is based upon an assumed amount of
Yep.
growth. And as
But
long,
there were-
again, back to that point, if
Yeah.
that assumption is in there, that's what it's
Yeah,
based
we're
on.
calling out the assumptions.
Yep.
Yeah, these
Right.
are the numbers, and there's
Yep.
1,000 assumptions, right? So this is, I think that's where we're at.
And so it can be very possible, but it's also aspirational at the same time. And that's what GM did. I mean, you have to move forward.
Yeah, and I could make a strong argument that part of the reason why some of these businesses might want to be here is because of an aggressive goal like that.
Correct.
So it's a self-fulfilling prophecy a little bit.
I guess my only point is there were actually two numbers in the spreadsheet that Dave gave you based upon percentages. One was the intensity of the portfolio as a whole, getting down to the 610 number. But then one is an absolute number of demand. And if there's more demand, then it's going to drive up that number.
And then Keith is just asking, which target do you want to have?
So which target, when you do the wording, I guess that's part of what I'm asking is which target are you shooting at? The intensity of the portfolio as a whole, because that's one line in the spreadsheet, or the overall number that also incorporates the amount of demand that there is.
What is the current target reading as?
Its reading is the total demand and, it's the product really of the amount of megawatts that are consumed and the portfolio intensity.
Our intention was that that's what it was
Yeah.
written on.
And again, as long as your assumptions are in there, which it sounds like you plan on, I'm fine with that too. Just wanted to clarify that
Yeah.
that's what.
It's good.
Before you move on from this one though, because I think, what's not up here and I don't know if to the benefit for PJ and Tim, last time, your goal speaks to affordability and reliability. The target only addresses the carbon reduction.
Yeah, that got brought up last time, and I think we should, and I wouldn't be the person to wordsmith this, but I think it would be appropriate to have a target nodding towards affordability and reliability as well. I think that's, I don't know what that says. I mean, that could be, you guys can come up with a draft and put it in here. It wouldn't, in my mind, circumvent the other target. It just should also be listed, right? Is that what I'm saying? They're not necessarily, they go hand in hand. Yeah, there's a healthy tension.
And reliability is always kind of understood in a utility company.
But we need to state that, because you compare BPW reliability to investor-owned utilities, it's not understood.
Well, and we do know that the integrated resource plan, again, if you've read that, you know that the carbon constrained case cost more than the base case. The aggressive carbon constrained case cost more than the carbon constrained case. So, there's an increasing cost associated
Pressure.
with that constraint. So just, again, we can we can propose to this group if you want it, or if you've got something you want to propose. Typically our metrics in the utility tend to focus on comparatives on a regional basis, whether you're comparing rates or you're comparing the reliability metrics. And we can propose both of those for consideration if you want.
You're already hyper competitive. I mean, we're already the best price in town, more or less, so.
Yeah, but we just adopted a 70% reduction. No, I'm just kidding.
For the record, Dave was just kidding.
I know. I'm just kidding.
He's just kidding, okay.
No, I mean, yeah, the good news around all of this is this is all in alignment. Like solar is, this is all lining up. Renewable energy on this kind of scale is the most cost competitive. So I think we're good to go on that part. So my vote would be you guys draft something that you're comfortable with around reliability and affordability, because I don't want to make up those words because I have no idea how you would talk about it, and then let us respond to how you guys would write those targets. And if other people think differently, then
Second?
great.
Perfect.
Okay, so in 7 minutes, we'll get through the next 3 levers and decide what we want to do officially.
Cool.
Well, how about this? So right now, we've got a path to 11.5 by 2030 in front of us. Are there any major things on any of the other levers that we want to address, or do we want to talk about the 11.5 with the 7 minutes we have left?
Okay, super quick comment. If we can go back to the last spreadsheet that was calculating 11.5, that's like 4.5 from electricity, 5 from building natural gas, and like 1.5 from transportation. Just, that's what we have to deal with.
Yeah, the mix.
Correct.
Great. Were there any of the other goals or targets in the other levers that really need a big revisit, or do we want to just
Just
We-
what
Talk
I
about
said
the
before, I
11.5.
jumped ahead. My
Yeah.
mind was leaping to there already. And,
Yeah.
and it's just, the attempt at a series of assumptions around education impact and carbon offset purchasing impact would be interesting. This might be the group to start that conversation. Whether it gets baked in, does it give us more comfort to get to 11.5? Does it give us more comfort to get to 10 by 2030? Is just interesting to me. Still a question.
Yeah.
If I could maybe just put something out there real quick for consideration. I know there's not a lot of time left today to talk about it, but you know, an EWR, energy waste reduction program that gets to 2% per year, a 5% shift of natural gas to electrification, and maintaining natural gas energy waste reduction in SEMCO are pretty aggressive in and of themselves and require education in order for it to happen. So I'm not sure how much more education would change the reaches that are within those targets. The offsets, I agree with you that there's not something there, but I think that's pretty easily quantifiable. But again, it's a matter of who makes that purchase, who are we going to assume is making that. That's the education. I have a tougher time sort of seeing a pathway forward because of the fact that these two have already submitted targets that ask for deep cuts, and even in the transportation sector, 25% adoption of EVs by a certain date. So there's a lot there already from an education standpoint.
Yeah, that's the discussion that I wanted to have. Yeah.
And further discussion I would like to have whenever it happens is the governance recommendations and consideration. I think that's a very important aspect that you added on, and I would add a couple more. So
Yeah.
whenever we want to do this.
In the next 4 minutes. Okay. So I think what we need to be collectively thinking about is our job is to take a look at the next 3 to 5 years and prioritize new strategies for the next 3 to 5 years inside of a 40-year plan. And what we have more or less in front of us is a path to take what was a 40-year plan to get to 10 metric tons per capita by 2050, and basically in front of us is what we're saying is we're going to move that up to 2030, more or less, 11.5, 10, whatever, right? So I think what we have to be living in and thinking about is like, is that a good step right now for this point in the process, knowing that there's going to be more SDT committees and whatnot in the future, or do we need to think differently, or is more or less what we have in front of us right now a good step and something that we're comfortable with given the construct that we're living within over the course of 40 years, I think is the big sort of question. Because if we can answer that, then we can wordsmith the rest out of the little stuff.
It can be, and actually, if on the governance recommendations, if you had number 4, create a system of accountability, which would take care of some of these new goals, who is accountable if targets are not met, or kind of a structured reporting schedule. And then 5, to say these follow climate science, they are not following the recommendations for climate change. And then all these things would be very workable.
Just to be honest, I have not seen what you wrote, so I'm not sure I
Oh, yeah.
totally
Okay.
know
Well,
what you just said there.
Yeah, all these, whether it's education or whatever, to have some kind of accountability, just like is embedded in the targets for carbon offsets.
So beyond the steering committee and the existing functions, more or different committee structure? I think the governance conversation is a good one that we
Okay,
probably
we'll
should
say
have
that.
in
All
terms
right.
of what we want
But
to
I just,
recommend.
with what you're asking, with all these, are we good with this? If you add on some kind of accountability system to everything, then you could go with 70%, you could go with 11.5, you could go with whatever, but as long as it's accountable, somebody's following it,
Yeah,
whether 3 years, 5 years, 10 years.
yeah, that's good.
Big picture, I feel like, yeah, Brian, I think we've reached a very solid basis here. And, we're into minutia presentation and fine tuning, and that's all coming. But I struggle to think of any other massive levers that are gonna be movers, and there's some target fill-ins we can do, but feels like it's complete.
Scott, yeah. PJ, yeah. Do, wow, I got 2 minutes. Do we want to talk about 11.5 versus 10? The current goal is 10 by 2050. It's a nice messaging to do 10 by 20. We moved it to 10 by 2030. We have aggressive things in there. We have growth, load growth, probability, but we also have massive market tailwinds on everybody trying to figure this stuff out, and we haven't been calculating or counting any of the carbon offsets.
Yeah.
So if before they calculated to 13.5 and had a stretch goal of 10, do we want to have a calculation of 11.5 and a stretch goal of 10? I see 2 out of 3 head nods. 1, I can't tell if Scott's looking at me or if he's concerned.
Yes, Scott says yes.
Scott, Nikki says, Scott says yes.
Let the minutes reflect.
I'll let-
I'm a yes.
Boyd likes a stretch goal of 10.
Yes.
Other comments on that?
I'm not sure I'd be ready to answer that right now. I'm still digesting a lot of the discussion that we have had here today and the changes that have been made as a result of the discussion. When we walked in here, I thought what we had was a very rational and reasonable set of goals with underlying strategies. And I was also, and have been, very impressed by the fact that we can correlate a lot of these strategies with these goals. Today, what we heard was some external factors have arisen, and therefore, what we have here can reach an even more aggressive goal. If we, and I'm referring 13 to 11.
Yep.
Or 11.5. If we were to go to the stretch goal, I probably would not be supportive of doing it for the sake of being aspirational. I would be more inclined to do it if we were able to identify other factors that would be relevant to get us there.
So how about, let's think about it this way, and I know we got to bounce. This isn't the final draft, right? This is the next draft that we're going to get community feedback on. So what's a more interesting thing to get feedback on? 11.5? People being like, cool, you moved it up 20 years? That's amazing. Or 10? I don't know. I think that's more what's we're not actually deciding right now, right? We're mostly deciding what goes into the draft that goes out for community feedback. So
We're basing this on the information that's been provided us this afternoon, right? And so to Boyd's point is, unless there's other levers that we can put some numerical value to help us stretch that, then I'm opposed to doing that. I don't want to stretch something unless we can actually connect it to some kind of lever. I think it's going to be erroneous if we try.
So you like putting it at 11.5 for
Yes.
community feedback?
Yes, because we've got data that kind of supports that. But if we start to stretch it without looking at additional levers, I think we're not being honest with the public at that point.
And Scott, that's why I keep bringing up, I think we need to take a stab at some kind of assumptions around the carbon offset purchasing behavior. And its accessibility, affordability is what, over a 10-year period, very evolving, will be a mature market. It's time to do some math. And that's why I said I'm more comfortable of getting to a 10, because I can picture in my head, since I purchased them for my own business, how easy it is, with some education, with tier 1 suppliers even pushing down certain mandates here in the future that allow you to plug those holes pretty quickly with an annual purchase while you're working on other things. Just see there's probably enough there, but it would be interesting to get into the math a little bit. What are we saying for adoption rate? Who from, so does it fill that, or is it 11? Is it worth a half over 10 years? I don't know. I feel like it's there.
I think 11.5 actually is appropriate for right now where we're at, because I'm just putting myself, like, if I get asked, like, hey, they got a stretch goal of 10, I don't know that I'm someone without having all of this education and being in on all these meetings. I don't know if I'd be like, well, pump the brakes on the stretch goal. I'd be like, well, they said they could get to 10, so sure, right? I'd rather put 11.5 out for community feedback and see if people are pumped about the massive step forward that we're asking this plan to do, moving it up 20 years. If that, like, if that's a good thing, or if people don't think that that's aggressive enough, so to speak. But we do need to do the math on the carbon offsets and all of that. That's just down the road for task forces or what have you.
Why is that the only category that this group shouldn't look at the math for?
Well, we could.
Why
I
is
mean,
that down the road?
I don't know. It seems beyond strategy, but maybe not.
Yeah, I don't agree with that. I think if it's a big lever, there's a lot going on in that space, and to leave that off on the side for somebody else when every other category we've got some math for, I don't get it.
Okay, that's fine. I mean, I'm fine with doing. I've got 2022 wide open. We can just keep doing it. Teasing. Okay, so I don't know where we're actually landing this thing, but we have to leave. So we'll circulate a wordsmith something that represents what we just talked about, and have 11.5 as the draft document. I don't know if that is enough to be able to do the actual feedback on, or if we have to
Well,
get together
again, I think we're starting to prepare it, and I think you're gonna invite people in on July 19. I think that's plenty for them to comment on at this point on July 19, and then you'll have a chance, if you wanna carve out some of that meeting for continuation of your discussion and not just feedback from people, that's fine too. You know, it just depends on, and we'll work with the leadership to identify the groups that we want to have invited to come in. And obviously, there's a public comment section as well for those that may not get covered by that. Then you can continue to work on it. This is not done, you know, yet at this point.
Yeah, no, that's good. I like that. We'll touch base and actually leave room, unless we get tons and tons of groups that want to spend 10 minutes talking to us, which that would be fine. So, cool, great. Yeah, meeting adjourned. I won't bang the gavel with the mayor in the room.